Today on Dice and Dragons, Julie and I are continuing our quest as we go through the Clank games. Today we are going to be reviewing Clank, Sunken Treasures, the expansion for the main game. This game is by Renegade Studios and once again Direwolf Digital, and the game was designed by Paul Denon. Julie, tell our viewers about the game itself.
So like the original, obviously, deck building game. It's a 2 to 4 player game, ages 12 and above, 30 to 60 minutes.
Yeah, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. When we get into the how to play the game, we're really only going to go over some of the differences in Sunken Treasures. You guys can take a look up here. You're going to see a link to our original Clank video. Also, don't forget, you can take a look at the timestamps down below to get where you want to go in the video. And with that being said, grab your drink, grab your best friend.
I beat you to it. I grabbed you first.
Yes, you did. And let's take it to the table. You know, when you're early on something, especially if it's gambling, that means you'd be sunk.
Yeah, okay. Wasn't funny. Don't quit your day job.
Now we're going to take a look at Clank's expansion, Sunken Treasures. And we'll start with the game board. You see you do get a brand new game board. And just as with the other board, it is double-sided. And that is fantastic. And one thing you may have noticed on the board, you can see from the other camera, there is no market space. Now to just make the board, I think, a little bit smaller and simplify it, we have the new market tile where you will place any of the items that are available in the market. And now that we've talked about the game board, the one thing I do want to explain, in this video, you're not going to see any information on setup. You're not going to see any information on how to play. You can take a look. There should be a link popping up over my head. That will take you to our Clank video that will teach you how to set up the game and also how to play it. As this is just an expansion, we're going to focus on the expansion itself and what is different in the expansion, what are the new mechanics. Now we talked about the market area, so let's talk about the two new items you get. And these are the Scuba items. As you can see, they are Scuba helmets. Now these let you swim underwater. As you can see on the game board right here, there are squares that either require you to spend 1 movement point if you're having Scuba, or you need to spend 2 movement points. Another thing to note about these underwater spaces is if you're underwater and you do not come up for air at all during your turn, you will take 1 point of damage. That means you can move from a space that is underwater, such as this one, to the market and then back into an underwater space. You won't take any damage. You came up for air. So that is very important. You need to come up for air during your turn to avoid taking damage. Now, there's also some new spaces on the board here that you will see this star token. Now, not token, symbol. The star symbol is the Clank symbol. It means that when you move through that space, you generate Clank that will then be applied to the Clank area of the game board. You generate Clank equal to the number of symbols through the tunnel that you're going through. So in this case right here, it would be 2. Here, it would be 1. Now the next really new thing in this game is what's known as discarding. As in Clank, you have the ability to discard cards, but in this version of the game, with the expansion, when you discard cards, you will gain some effects, some abilities, and that can be very cool, especially when you're trying to generate more cards. To that end, I have taken out some of the cards, and that are different from the core game. And we'll go over what you get with regards to that. Let's start with the simplest one here, the medic. Now, the medic means you have the opportunity to discard a card to heal 1 damage. And you'll only get that if you discard a card. Remember, you can't, this card will let you discard a card. You can't just discard a card because you feel like it. That is not one of the options that you have during your turn. You have to play a card that lets you discard cards. When you look at the medic, we're going to just cut over to the boomerang. As you can see, when you discard this card, return it to your hand. Meaning if you play the medic, you could then discard the boomerang, but still get it that turn as well as heal. So that's some of the aspects that you see with regards to discarding. It can be a very powerful new mechanic in the game. We have the climbing gear here, which shows you another example is that if you discard a card, you can then use it to gain a movement point. Now, what's also great about things like the climbing gear is you can use that to discard your stumbles. Remember, you have to play all your cards, but if you have cards that let you discard cards, you can discard things that like stumble that are just negatives for your player before you actually have to play them. Now let's take a look at the shortcut. Now the shortcut is another card which is +1 Clank, and when you discard this card, you gain 2 movement points. It also has the acquire. You can acquire it and gain a movement point. And that is a pretty cool card as well. And then I just put the deep dive card out here, which is just an example. Discard 3 cards to draw 5. And as you can see with some of the cards that we have out there, maybe you want to go ahead and discard the shortcut, discard the boomerang. Those are 2 great cards to discard because you're going to be generating resources, which is very important in Clank, and it's something that you don't want to not do. Also, there is this goldfish, which becomes an addition to the deck, essentially. When you're playing on the Sunken Treasure board, you would use the goldfish as well as the goblin, as you can fight this only when you're in a flooded room. Now, this board differs from the core Clank board there is enough space out here to put all of the tokens out. You're not going to be putting any of them back in the box, meaning you would add the new tokens, the new major secret, the potion of heroism, and the 2 new minor secrets to the board, and you would then play everything. Now, if you are deciding to just play with some of the components of the expansion with normal Clank, you would then mix these 3 items in. You can then just mix them up and then decide if you're going to be using them when you draw them at random. You can also just decide to include it and place it in randomly. It's completely up to you, especially if you want to get those components into the game. There are 35 new dungeon cards, and these cards, even if you're not using this map, can just be mixed into regular Clank to give you a different experience. Now, the other thing that is different in Clank Sunken Treasures is, of course, these treasure rooms. When you enter a treasure room, you gain the gold value that is listed in the space. I can see right here, at least on this side of the map, they're only worth 1 gold. And as you can see, the expansion is very straightforward. Here are the rules. It is just a nice 1-pager that explains the differences and how to mix in your stuff from Clank Sunken Treasures into Clank. And that's all we really have for you guys. So we'll cut right now and we'll take you to our review of this expansion to Clank Sunken Treasures. Is it worth your time? Keep it right here because we'll be right back. Now, just before we get to the review of the game, I realized I didn't quite clarify Scuba. Now, when you happen to have the Scuba item, you've purchased it, you don't have to worry about coming up for air. I neglected to mention that. You can swim and stay in any of the underwater spaces as long as you want. You will not take damage as long as you've equipped the scuba gear that is also worth 5 points. Now that I've got that clarification out of the way, we're going to go right on to the review. Clank Sunken Treasures. Did it rise you up above the depths or drag you down into the depths of despair? Is this a good expansion?
I think it kept me threading water, which at least it didn't sink me. It's nice. It's
Threading water?
Threading water, yes.
It's treading water.
Okay, so it's the Frenchie in me. That being said, it does add a little bit of variety if you've been playing for a long time, Clank, and you love it and you want to try a little bit more variety. There's a couple of cool cards. There's the new mechanic of the of the flooded rooms and the crystal fish. But
don't forget the when you're moving, you can generate Clank on some of the routes as well. That's another new mechanic.
Yeah, but for me, despite there's a couple cards I really loved. despite that, I'd say I don't think it's a must-have. I don't think it completely changes the game or it makes it adds that much more. So that's my opinion. What about you?
I think the game, it's more Clank, and that's the best way to put it. There's a couple new mechanics. It'll give you just a slight flavor of something different. But if you're playing with 2 players, I don't know how much that's going to come into effect in the game. We really didn't go through a lot of the new cards when we played. We played it multiple times, and we got to see a nice variety, but we didn't go through all the cards. The generating Clank as you're moving around the board is interesting, but it didn't really have a drastic effect on the game. One of the games Julie did end up dying in the depths because of the amount of Clank she had, but that wasn't due to the new mechanics on the board. And when you have 2 players, you can both get the Scuba and sort of negate that flooded room mechanic. I think the expansion, especially if you're a family of 4 that plays this or a regular gaming group of 4 that plays it, is going to bring a larger group a lot more than it brought the 2-player scenario. But if you've been playing Clank a lot, as Julie said, this is more Clank, and it has some new mechanics, and it will let you refresh your gameplay experience. You can also take the cards and put them in the core game, so even add a little bit more variety into the core game. So the game it's a nice have. I don't think it's a must-have. If you really enjoy Clank and need more, this is a solid pickup. You're not going to be disappointed.
I give it a 6.5.
I also give it a 6.5 out of 10. Solid, but could use a little bit more. Well, there's the Mummy's Curse coming up. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit more out of that expansion than this one.
Yeah, and also don't forget, one of the things that you didn't appreciate as much was the fact that once it's mixed in, you can't tell it apart.
Yes, that is one thing that I really did not enjoy. There is no symbols on the cards to denote the different expansions. So once this is in your Clank game, you got to go download a card list to separate it, try and pain in the butt. Really don't like it. That's part of the reason why it's on at 6.5 and not a 7. Now, with that being said, you can find a link showing up here shortly to our other reviews, also a link back to our Clank review. You can find our social media feeds in the video description. And with that being said, as always on Dice and Dragons, grab your drink, grab your best friend, and I'll let Julie take it out.
Keep playing games.
You remembered.
I still think it should be Clink.
I don't know. Sunken treasure. Wouldn't hear much clinking. It could be blub. Blub, 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 blub.